A multi-billion-dollar corporation, a powerhouse of global finance, is identified by a single, elegant symbol. It's on their skyscrapers, their letterhead, their $10 billion balance sheet. It's a logo synonymous with power. One night, the company's ruthless CEO, Julian Vance, dines at a luxury restaurant. He notices his waitress, a young woman named Helen, absently doodling on a napkin. He mocks her drawing, laughing at its simplicity, but the laughter dies in his throat. He recognizes the doodle, and in that instant, his entire empire, built on a single, stolen secret, begins to crumble. The Gilded Quill was the kind of restaurant that didn't just serve food. It curated experiences for people who believed their time was more valuable than the annual salary of the staff. It was all dark mahogany, hushed carpets, and spotlights that hit the crystal glasses just right, making every table look like an advertisement for obscene wealth. Helen Hayes moved through this world like a ghost. At 24, she possessed a talent that was suffocating under the weight of her reality. Her days were a blur of art history textbooks for classes she took at a community college, and her nights were spent here, balancing trays of $300 tasting menus. Every cent she earned was a drop in the ocean against the tide of her mother's medical bills. Tonight, the restaurant was particularly tense. Table 7, a 4-top, in the most exclusive alcove, was the source of the pressure. The man at its head was Julian Vance. Helen didn't know his name. Not yet. She just knew him as Table 7, the one with the Arctic blue eyes and the $50,000 Patek Philippe watch that he checked every 5 minutes, as if the universe were late to an appointment with him. He was flanked by 3 other men in identical dark suits, including his COO, Marcus Thorne, a man with a hyena's smile. "The service here has gone downhill, Julian," Marcus commented, loud enough for Helen to hear as she refilled his water. "Mediocrity is a contagion," Julian replied, not even looking at her. He waved a dismissive hand. "Another bottle of the 05 Petrus, and tell the chef if the venison is even a degree over medium rare, I'm sending it back." "Yes, sir," Helen murmured, her face a professional, neutral mask. She retreated to a side station to wait for the next course, her feet aching. The pressure in her chest was building. The hospital had called again. Her mother's medication costs were rising. She pulled a small, worn notepad and a pen from her apron pocket. A nervous habit. Her hand began to move, her mind drifting away from the restaurant, away from the bills. She drew. It was always the same thing when she was stressed, a shape her father had taught her long ago, a single unbroken line looping and weaving through itself to form a complex, balanced knot. It was her sigil, her anchor. "What is that?" Helen jumped. Julian Vance was standing right beside her. He had moved with a predator's silence. His associates were watching, amused. She fumbled the notepad, trying to hide it in her apron. "Nothing, sir. Just a doodle." Julian's lip curled in a smirk. He snatched the notepad from her hand before she could react. He held the small page up to the light, a look of profound arrogance on his face. "A doodle," he scoffed. The table laughed. "Look at this, Marcus," Julian said, turning to his COO. "Our waitress is an artiste." He studied the intricate knot. "What is this supposed to be? A failed tribal tattoo? A pretzel you saw in a fever dream?" Helen's face burned. It was one thing to be invisible. It was another to be mocked. This felt personal. That symbol was hers. It was his, her father's. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice tight with humiliation. "Give it back." "My advice," Julian said, his voice dropping to a cold, conspiratorial whisper as he leaned in, "is to focus on the water glasses. If your art is as bad as your service, you're better off sticking to waitressing." He didn't just drop the notepad. He let it flutter from his fingers, a piece of trash, onto the floor. Helen stared at the small white square on the dark carpet. She felt the eyes of the entire dining room on her, even if they weren't. Her hands trembled. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She bent down, picked up the notepad, and walked stiffly toward the kitchens, the sound of their laughter following her like a physical blow. Julian Vance returned to his table, the incident already forgotten. He was a shark that had nudged a piece of driftwood, found it unappetizing, and moved on. "Now," he said, taking a sip of his wine, "about the Tokyo acquisition." An hour later, the main courses were cleared. The wine had flowed. Julian Vance was expansive, detailing a ruthless plan to absorb a smaller competitor. "The press release will hit at 9 a.m., Julian said. "By then our proxies will have the votes. It's a clean kill." Marcus Thorne raised his glass. "To Ethelred Holdings, 20 years, Julian. 20 years since you and Arthur started it." The name hung in the air, instantly souring Julian's mood. He shot Marcus a look of pure ice. Arthur Harrison was a footnote. He was dead weight. Ethelred began the day I cut him loose. "Of course, Julian, of course," Marcus placated, recognizing the boundary. "I just mean, the 20th anniversary is coming up. The board is sentimental." "Sentiment is a liability," Julian snapped. "Speaking of which," Marcus said, shifting topics, "the marketing team is pushing again. They want to refresh the brand. They want to simplify the logo." Julian stopped, his wine glass halfway to his lips. "Simplify? Simplify what?" "The logo. The Ethelred knot," Marcus said carefully. "They say it's too complex for digital applications, that it's dated." Julian let out a short, bark-like laugh. "Dated? It's timeless. Those children in marketing know nothing. That logo is Ethelred. It represents stability, complexity, an unbreakable foundation. It's a $10 billion brand, and they want to change it? Absolutely not. Fire the entire department." "I'll handle it," Marcus said quickly. It's the core of the brand identity. It's on everything." "As it should be," Julian said. He pulled out his phone, a custom-built $1,000 device. He tapped the screen, and the Ethelred Holdings corporate website loaded. And there it was, front and center, against a stark white background. The company logo, a single, unbroken line, looping and weaving through itself to form a complex, balanced knot. Julian Vance went rigid. His blood didn't run cold, it evaporated. The restaurant, the wine, Marcus's voice, it all faded into a roaring vacuum. He wasn't seeing the screen. He was seeing the small, crumpled notepad page he had thrown on the floor. It wasn't like the logo. It wasn't similar. It was identical. Every curve, every weave, every precise intersection. "Coincidence," he muttered. It had to be. It was impossible. "What's that, Julian?" "That waitress," Julian said, his voice strained. "The one who was drawing." "The artiste?" Marcus chuckled. "What about her? Where is she?" Julian stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. It hit the floor with a heavy, muffled thud that silenced the nearby tables. "Julian, what's wrong?" "It was our logo," Julian hissed, his face pale. "The drawing. It was the Ethelred knot." Marcus frowned, confused. "Don't be ridiculous. It was a scribble. A pretzel, like you said. It's a simple, geometric shape. People draw knots all the time." "Simple?" Julian's voice was dangerously low. "You think that's simple? It's not. It's the Vance Harrison knot. It's not simple at all. It was designed with a specific principle." He remembered Arthur Harrison in their dorm room, sketching on a napkin, a real napkin, 20 years ago, and explaining the Celtic geometry, the two-path as one philosophy. A waitress, a random waitress in a random restaurant, doodling their logo, the logo Arthur Harrison had designed. Julian grabbed a passing busboy by the arm, his grip like a vice. "The waitress, the one who was serving table 7. Where is she?" The busboy flinched. Helen? Her shift ended, sir. She clocked out about 10 minutes ago." Julian stared at the empty doorway. He felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Pure, undiluted panic. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a ghost. A ghost had just walked out of his restaurant. "Find her," Julian ordered Marcus, who was now standing, looking alarmed. "Find her? How? I don't even know her full name. I don't care. Get the manager. Get the employee files. I want her name, her address, everything, now." Julian threw a black American Express card on the table. "Handle this. I'll be in the car." He stormed out of the Gilded Quill, leaving a $5,000 dinner bill and a dining room full of bewildered patrons. The Patek Philippe on his wrist seemed to tick with unbearable slowness. 10 minutes. She was only 10 minutes gone. But in those 10 minutes, 20 years of carefully buried history had just been dug up and thrown in his face. The private elevator to Julian Vance's penthouse hissed open, revealing a 3,000-square-foot expanse of glass and cold, minimalist furniture. The lights of New York City glittered below, a kingdom he had built. Tonight it felt like a prison. He tore off his tie and went straight to the bar, pouring a glass of Macallan, 25. He didn't sip it. He swallowed half of it in one gulp, the burn doing nothing to stop the tremor in his hand. "Arthur," he whispered to the empty room. He hadn't said that name aloud in at least a decade. Arthur Harrison, his college roommate, his co-founder, the albatross around his neck. Julian walked to his study, a room panelled in rare, dark wood. He keyed a code into a biometric safe hidden behind a minimalist painting. Inside, beneath stock certificates and bearer bonds, was an old, leather-bound portfolio. He hadn't opened it since the last time he'd moved. He laid it on his desk. The leather was cracked. He opened it. Inside were the original incorporation papers for Ethelred Holdings, dated 20 years ago, and beneath them, a series of sketches on high-quality drafting paper. There it was, the Ethelred knot. He and Arthur had been inseparable in college. Julian, the prodigy of economics and strategy. Arthur, the dreamer, the artist with a mind for systems and philosophy. They were going to conquer the world. Ethelred was their shared dream. "It has to represent us, Julian," Arthur had said, his pencil flying across the page. 2 lines, see? They look separate, but they are one. They weave, they support, they are unbreakable together. It's a symbol of partnership, of trust. Julian's lip twisted at the memory. Trust. Arthur had provided the initial genius, the name, the philosophy, and the logo. Julian had provided the ruthlessness. The betrayal, when it came, had been surgical. Arthur, the artist, was naive about business. He trusted Julian to handle the boring parts, the LLC filings, the shareholder agreements. Julian, with the help of a team of shark-like lawyers, had structured the company in such a way that Arthur's shares were in a different, non-voting class. When their first major seed funding came through, Julian triggered a dilution clause Arthur hadn't even known existed. In a single, brutal boardroom meeting, Arthur's 50% stake was reduced to 0.5%. He was pushed out, given a severance that barely covered his legal fees, and forced to sign an ironclad NDA that barred him from ever claiming co-founder status. Arthur Harrison, the creative soul of Ethelred, was legally erased from its history. Julian had told himself it was necessary. Arthur was weak. He was a footnote. He'd held the company back. But looking at the perfect, hand-drawn logo, Julian knew it was a lie. That knot, that unbreakable partnership, was the entire foundation of the brand. It was Arthur's soul, digitized and plastered on a $10 billion empire. Julian had heard, through the grapevine, that Arthur had fallen apart after that. He'd tried to sue, but Julian's legal team had buried him in motions until he was broke. He died a few years later. Heart attack, Julian thought he'd heard. Or was it an aneurysm? It didn't matter. He was gone. Until tonight. His phone buzzed. It was Graves, his head of private security, a man who existed in shadows and spreadsheets. "Sir," Graves's voice was a monotone. "I have the information from the restaurant manager. The waitress's name is Helen Hayes, Hayes. She's 24, lives in a walk-up in Queens. No criminal record. Enrolled part-time at Queens College." "Hayes," Julian paced. "That's not the name. Check for a connection. To Arthur Harrison." "Who, sir?" "Arthur. Harrison? Harrison. Check her mother's name. Check her birth certificate. Cross-reference it. Now, Graves." "Yes, sir." Julian waited. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. He stared at the original drawing. He remembered Arthur's laugh. The phone buzzed again, 5 minutes later. "Sir," Graves said. The monotone was unchanged, but the information was a grenade. Helen Hayes's mother is Sarah Hayes. Maiden name, Sarah Jensen. She was married to Arthur Harrison from 1999 until his death in 2008. Julian's legs gave out. He sat heavily in his leather chair. "Helen," he breathed. "Helen Harrison." She had taken her mother's maiden name. She was Arthur's daughter. Arthur's daughter. And he had mocked her. He had taken her father's art, the one thing she had left of him, and let it fall to the floor like garbage. The panic was replaced by a cold, sharp calculation. This was not a ghost. This was a threat, a potential lawsuit, a PR nightmare. The origin story of Ethelred Holdings, the one he'd carefully curated for 2 decades, the sole founder myth, was suddenly standing on the edge of a cliff. "Graves," Julian said, his voice now steady and cold. "What else? Is she in debt?" "What's her situation?" "Significant, sir. Her mother, Sarah, has advanced multiple sclerosis. The medical debt is over $200,000. Helen Hayes works 2 jobs to cover the medication costs. They're 3 months behind on rent." Julian almost smiled. It was a cruel, thin smile. Debt, that was good. Debt was leverage. "Send a car," Julian commanded. "I'm going to Queens. I'm going to pay Ms. Hayes a visit. This ends tonight." The N train rattled past the window of the small, 4th-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens. The apartment was cramped, but clean. The walls were covered in canvases, some blank, some brilliant, with half-finished landscapes and portraits. The smell of oil paint, turpentine, and cheap, reheated soup hung in the air. Helen Hayes sat at the small kitchen table, her head in her hands. The humiliation from the restaurant still clung to her, a sticky, sour film. She could still hear the man's mocking laugh. A pretzel you saw in a fever dream. "Helen, is that you, honey?" A weak voice came from the other room. Helen quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. "Yeah, Mom, it's me." She walked into the tiny curtained-off bedroom. Her mother, Sarah Hayes, was propped up in a hospital bed that took up most of the room. Sarah had been a vibrant woman, an art historian. Now, multiple sclerosis had trapped her, leaving her frail but with the same sharp, intelligent eyes. "How was work?" Sarah asked, her words slightly slurred. "It was fine," Helen lied, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her mother's hand. "The usual. Rich people, small tips." "You're a terrible liar, Helen." "What happened?" Helen sighed. She couldn't burden her mother with it. "Just a rude customer. It's fine. I'm just tired." "My strong girl," Sarah whispered, stroking her hair. "You shouldn't have to do this. You should be at a real art school, not this. I'm where I need to be, Mum, Helen said firmly. Now, did you take your evening meds? They're so expensive, baby. We'll manage. We always manage. After settling her mother, Helen went back to the kitchen. The red light on the answering machine was blinking. She pressed it. This is a final notice for Sarah Hayes from the Bayside Medical Group. Payment is 90 days overdue. We will be forced to suspend care and refer this to a collections agency. Helen slammed her fist on the delete button. Tears of frustration and rage welled up. She was drowning. She grabbed her sketchbook, the one she carried everywhere, and flipped to a new page. Her pen found the familiar pattern. She drew the knot. Her family sigil, her father had called it. She had been 6 years old. Her father, Arthur Harrison, was still alive, still vibrant, though the light was already fading from his eyes. The betrayal by his partner had happened, but he wasn't broken yet. He'd sat her on his lap in his tiny, cluttered studio. You have the gift, Helen, he'd said, guiding her small hand. You have the line. What is it, Daddy? She'd asked. It's our sigil. It's a promise. It means that no matter how many times you get lost, the line will always lead you back home. It's one line, see? No beginning, no end. It means unbreakable. She drew it now, over and over, the loops and weaves a meditation. She had never connected it to anything. She had no idea what Ethelred Holdings was. Her mother, in her bitterness, had never spoken the name of the company or the man who had destroyed her husband. She only ever referred to him as the monster. Helen looked at the drawing. It was the only thing her father had ever given her. This symbol. This and a mountain of debt. The rude man at the restaurant. His mockery of the drawing had felt like a sacrilege. It was as if he'd laughed at her father's memory. There was a sharp, loud knock on the apartment door. Helen froze. It was almost 1 a.m. Nobody knocked this late. The collections agency? The landlord? She crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Her heart stopped. It was him. The man from the restaurant. The one with the Arctic blue eyes and the $50,000 watch. He wasn't in a restaurant now. He was in her hallway, and he looked dangerous. He knocked again, harder. Ms. Hayes, I know you're in there. My name is Julian Vance. We need to talk. The name meant nothing to Helen, but it meant everything to the woman in the next room. Julian. Vance? Sarah's voice, usually so weak, cracked like a whip. Helen heard the groan of the hospital bed, the sound of her mother forcing herself up. Mum, stay in bed. I'll handle it, Helen called, her heart hammering. Helen, no, Sarah cried, a raw panic in her voice. Don't open that door. That's him. That's the monster. Helen's blood ran cold. The monster. The one who... The knocking became a pounding. Ms. Hayes, I am not leaving. Open the door, or I'll have my security open it for you. Helen, trembling, undid the deadbolt. This man, who she thought was just a rich bully, was the man who had ruined her father. Julian Vance stood in the doorway, his bespoke suit looking utterly alien in the cramped, paint-stained hallway. His eyes scanned the small apartment, a look of undisguised distaste on his face. Behind him stood a large, grim-faced man, Mr. Graves. May I come in? Julian asked. It wasn't a question. He stepped inside, and the small room seemed to shrink. What do you want? Helen asked, her voice shaking but defiant. She stood between Vance and her mother's room. You, a voice rasped. Sarah Hayes had wheeled herself into the doorway, her face pale and contorted with a hatred so deep it was terrifying. You, Julian Vance, you have the nerve to come here. Julian's gaze flickered to Sarah, a brief flash of, was it recognition? No, it was just annoyance. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat, "you haven't aged well." Helen felt a surge of pure rage. "Get out." "In a moment," Julian said. He turned his cold gaze on Helen. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. You're Arthur Harrison's daughter, and tonight you are drawing my company's logo." Helen was stunned. "Your company? What are you talking about? That's my father's drawing. He called it our family sigil." "A charming sentiment," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But in the real world, it's called the Ethelred knot, and it is the registered trademark of Ethelred Holdings, my $10 billion corporation. The one your father was let go from 20 years ago." It was like a bomb had gone off in her mind. The logo, the mockery, the connection. This man hadn't just insulted her doodle. He had stolen her father's life's work and was mocking her for having it. "You stole it," Helen whispered, the realization hitting her. "Stole?" Julian laughed. "That's a very dramatic word. Your father was a failed artist who signed a bad contract. It was a legal buyout. He was paid for his early contributions." "You liar!" Sarah shrieked, gripping the wheels of her chair. "You bankrupted him. You forced him to sign. You waited until he was drowning, until I was pregnant with Helen, and you threatened to countersue him into oblivion. He signed under duress. You destroyed him." "He destroyed himself," Julian said, his patience snapping. "He was a sentimental fool who couldn't see the future. I built an empire. He drew doodles in a notebook." "The doodle you built your empire on," Helen shouted. "Enough," Julian said. He reached into his coat and produced a checkbook and a thick document. "This is why I'm here. Clearly, you are in distress." He gestured around the apartment. "This is squalor. I'm a compassionate man, despite what you may think. I'm here to correct an old oversight." He placed the document on the kitchen table. It was a non-disclosure agreement. "I am prepared to offer you, let's say, $500,000. Helen stared at the number. $500,000. It was enough to pay off all the medical debt. Enough to move her mother somewhere safe. Enough to live. "You will sign this," Julian continued, "which states that you and your mother will never speak of Arthur Harrison's connection to Ethelred Holdings again. You will never claim any ownership or connection to the logo. It is a gift for your silence." He clicked a pen and slid it across the table. Sarah was sobbing, a broken, angry sound. "Blood money, Julian. It's blood money." Helen looked at the check. She looked at her mother. She saw the medical bills piled on the counter. She saw her unsold canvases. Then she looked at Julian Vance, at his smug, assured face. He thought he could buy her. He thought he could buy her father's memory. She picked up the pen. Julian smiled, a thin, triumphant smile. Helen looked him dead in the eye. "You laughed at me," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm afraid I don't. Tonight, you laughed at me. You mocked my father's drawing, and you threw it on the floor." "It was a misunderstanding," Julian said impatiently. "Sign the paper." Helen snapped the pen in half with her bare hands. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice vibrating with a force she didn't know she possessed. Julian's smile vanished. "Excuse me? You come into my home. You insult my mother. You try to buy my father's legacy for $500,000 after you built a $10 billion company on his back. You think we're that cheap? You think he was that cheap? Get out. We don't want your money." Julian Vance was, for the second time that night, completely stunned. He had expected tears. He had expected gratitude. He had not expected this. He glared at Helen, his eyes promising retribution. "You are making a terrible mistake, Ms. Hayes. A life-altering mistake. You will regret this." "The only mistake," Helen said, opening the door, "was my father's. He trusted you. I won't make the same one. Now get out." Julian straightened his suit. He gave Helen one last, venomous look. He turned and walked out. Graves followed, pausing to give Helen a look that was almost respectful. The door slammed shut. Helen bolted the lock and slid to the floor, her entire body shaking. "Helen." "Oh, baby, what did you do?" Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I did what Dad would have wanted," Helen said, her voice raw. "He's not a footnote. He's not. But Helen, the money, the hospital." "I don't care," Helen said, looking at her sketchbook. "He has the logo. But we have the truth." "But the truth isn't enough, honey," Sarah said, a terrible new fear in her eyes. "He's not just going to walk away. He's going to destroy us." Julian Vance did not sleep. He returned to his penthouse, and, in a fit of cold, calculated rage, he made 2 calls. The first was to his legal team. "I want you to find a way to evict Sarah and Helen Hayes. Leverage the landlord. The outstanding medical debt? Buy it. Buy all of it. I want them buried in lawsuits by sunrise." The second was to Mr. Graves. "I want them watched. Every call. Every person they meet. If she so much as buys a coffee, I want to know." He would not be defied. He would crush this. Back in Queens, the adrenaline was fading, leaving Helen and Sarah in a state of terrified shock. "He's right, Mom. He'll crush us," Helen said, pacing the small room. "The NDA. It means he's scared. He's scared of the truth. But we have no proof. It's just our word against his." "No," Sarah said, her voice thin. "No, your father. He knew. After the betrayal, he was broken, but he was also angry. He was an artist, Helen, but he wasn't a fool. He left a fail-safe." Helen stopped pacing. "What are you talking about?" "Under my bed," Sarah whispered. "The old trunk, your father's. He called it his apocalypse chest." Helen pulled a large, dusty, leather and wood trunk from under the hospital bed. It was locked. "The key. It's in my jewelry box. The silver locket," Sarah said. Helen retrieved the locket, opened it, and found a small, antique key. She unlocked the trunk. The smell of old paper, leather, and graphite filled the air. The trunk was filled with her father's journals, dozens of them. Thick, leather-bound sketchbooks. "He documented everything, Helen," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "After Julian. After the meeting. Your father spent a year writing down everything. Every meeting. Every promise. Every design." Helen pulled out the first book. It was dated 2004, 2 years before Ethelred Holdings was officially incorporated. She opened it, and she gasped. Page after page was filled with sketches, geometric calculations, and philosophical notes. And there it was, the Ethelred knot. She flipped through, her hands shaking. She found a page dated March 14th, 2005. It was a pristine, final drawing of the logo, and beneath it, 2 signatures, Arthur Harrison and Julian Vance. On the page, in Arthur's elegant script, was a title, Our Partnership Agreement, the Ethelred Knot. He signed it, Helen breathed. "Julian Vance signed this. This is proof. Proof he knew it was Dad's. Proof it was a partnership." "Keep reading," Sarah said, her eyes bright with feverish intensity. Helen turned the page, and her heart stopped. On the next page was another logo. It was similar, but more. It was more complex, more beautiful, more unbreakable. The lines wove in a more intricate, dynamic pattern. It was a clear evolution of the first design. Beneath this new drawing, Arthur had written a note. "JV prefers the simpler one. Calls it cleaner. I call it colder." But he holds the purse strings, holding this one in reserve. My legacy knot. The one for the company we should have built. Helen stared at the drawing, her artist's eye instantly seeing its superiority. Her father hadn't just been a dreamer, he'd been a master. He made a better one, she whispered. But that wasn't the failsafe. Tucked into the back pocket of the journal was a folded, official-looking document. Helen unfolded it. It was a certificate of copyright registration from the United States Copyright Office, dated 2005. Arthur Harrison had registered the Ethelred knot not as a corporate trademark, but as a standalone artistic work under his own name. A full year before, Julian Vance had filed the incorporation papers and registered the logo as a corporate asset. Helen looked up, her eyes wide. "Mum, what does this mean?" "It means," Sarah said, a slow, fierce smile spreading across her face, "that your father never had the money to fight him in court. But he left you the gun. He owns it," Helen said, the words dawning on her. Julian Vance never owned the logo. He's been using stolen property for 20 years, a $10 billion company, built on a fraudulent claim of ownership. The collections notice on the counter suddenly seemed very, very small. The balance of power had just shifted. Entirely. "He's going to destroy us, Mum," Helen said, her voice no longer fearful, but cold. "But we're going to destroy him first." The next morning, Helen's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A message popped up. A man's voice. "Miss Hayes, this is Robert Klein, attorney for your landlord. This is a formal notice of eviction." Simultaneously, an email arrived. "Final demand. Bayside Medical Group Collections." Julian was moving fast. The sharks were circling. "He's trying to scare us," Helen said. "He's trying to make us desperate." "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "We can't fight his lawyers." "We don't have to," Helen said, her mind racing. She was an artist, but she was her father's daughter. She understood systems. "We can't fight him in the trenches. We have to go over his head." She spent the next hour online, not looking at art, but at Ethelred Holdings. She researched its board of directors. Marcus Thorne, the COO. He was Julian's man. A few investment bankers. They'd side with the money. 2 legacy members from the early days. And then, one name. Isabella Vance, Julian's ex-wife. She held a 10% stake from the divorce and, crucially, a permanent, non-voting seat on the board where she ran the company's charitable foundation. The financial blogs described their divorce as apocalyptic, bitter, and fueled by Julian's sociopathic business practices. "A snake eating a snake," Helen had heard Marcus Thorne say at the restaurant. Helen found the contact page for the Ethelred Foundation. She didn't send an email. She called the main number. "Ethelred Foundation, how may I help you?" "I need to speak to Isabella Vance. My name is Helen Harrison." She used her father's name. It was a key. She was put on hold for 5 minutes. She expected to be transferred to a lawyer. Instead, a new voice came on the line. Sharp, elegant, and wary. "This is Isabella Vance. Who is Helen Harrison?" "I'm Arthur Harrison's daughter," Helen said, her voice steady. Silence. A long, heavy pause. "Mr. Harrison passed away, I recall," Isabella said, her voice softer now. "My condolences. Julian, he never spoke of him." "That's because he buried him," Helen said. "And now he's trying to bury me. I have something you need to see. Something that belongs to my father. Something your ex-husband has been borrowing for 20 years." "What are you talking about?" "The Ethelred knot," Helen said. "I have the original, dated, signed sketches. And I have the copyright registration. My father's name. From 2005. Ethelred Holdings has been using stolen IP since its inception." The line was so quiet, Helen thought she'd been disconnected. "Meet me," Isabella said, her voice a steel blade. 1 hour. The lobby of the Met. By the Egyptian wing. The meeting was tense. Helen, in her simple coat, and Isabella Vance, in a Chanel suit, looked like two different species. Helen didn't bring the originals. She brought high-resolution, time-stamped photographs. Isabella looked at the images on the tablet. Her perfectly composed face went pale. "He signed it," she whispered. "Our partnership agreement." She looked at the copyright certificate. This is catastrophic. "He offered me $500,000 to stay quiet last night," Helen said. Isabella's head snapped up. "And this morning, he's trying to have my sick mother and me evicted." Isabella's eyes hardened. "Of course he is. That's Julian. He can't negotiate. He can only annihilate." Isabella stood up. "This isn't just a legal threat, Miss Harrison. This is a moral one. And it's an existential one. If this gets out, the stock will collapse. The brand is a lie." "What do you want to do?" Helen asked. Julian called an emergency board meeting for 3 p.m. today. He's going to restructure the marketing department, his code for firing everyone who questioned him about the logo. "He has no idea what's coming," Isabella said. "You're coming with me." At 3 p.m., Julian Vance sat at the head of the polished obsidian table in the 80th floor boardroom. Marcus Thorne was at his right. "Thank you all for coming," Julian began. "I've called this meeting to address a minor brand identity issue and to propose a realignment of our marketing division." The door opened. "Sorry we're late, Julian." Isabella Vance walked in, and right behind her, clutching a leather portfolio, was Helen Hayes. Julian Vance's blood turned to ice. He half rose from his chair. "Isabella, what is the meaning of this? This is a closed meeting. Get her out of here." "She's here as my guest, Julian," Isabella said, taking her seat. "And as a claimant. Please, Miss Harrison, the floor is yours." Marcus Thorne looked confused. "Claimant? Julian, what is this?" Helen's heart was a drum against her ribs, but she wasn't a waitress anymore. She was her father's daughter. She walked to the head of the table, opposite Julian. She opened the portfolio and laid out the first photograph, the partnership agreement, signed by both men. "My name," Helen said, her voice clear and strong, "is Helen Harrison. I am the daughter of Arthur Harrison, the co-founder of this company." A murmur went around the table. "That is a lie!" Julian roared. "Arthur Harrison was a contract designer who was bought out." "Was he?" Helen said. She laid down the second document, the 2005 copyright registration for the Ethelred knot. "This company," Helen said, "your $10 billion brand, is built on a logo you do not own. My father, Arthur Harrison, held the copyright to this artwork, registered a full year before Ethelred was incorporated. For 20 years you have been in direct, willful violation of his copyright." The room exploded. The bankers, the legacy members, they were all on their feet, shouting, "Julian, is this true? This is fraud. Our entire brand IP. It's worthless. It's a fabrication," Julian yelled, his face purple. "She's a gold digger. Her mother put her up to this." "Then you won't mind the lawsuit," Isabella said calmly. "A multi-billion-dollar suit for damages and 20 years of profits. Imagine the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. Ethelred Holdings, the empire built on a lie. The stock won't just fall, it will be delisted. Marcus Thorne, the hyena, saw his opening. He saw Julian's desperation. This is gross negligence, Julian," Marcus suddenly announced, turning on his boss. "You exposed the entire company. You put all of our shareholders at risk over a personal vendetta. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence. Julian Vance must be removed as CEO." Another board member seconded it. "All in favor?" Julian stared, betrayed, as hands went up. He was finished. "Wait," Helen said. The room fell silent. "Mr. Thorne," Helen said, "I've also been reviewing my father's journals. He mentioned you. The ambitious one. Julian's little shadow. He also documented your role in the dilution scheme." Marcus's face went white. "If Mr. Vance is removed," Helen continued, "Mr. Thorne is not his replacement. You're both out." Julian stared at Helen. He had been outmaneuvered, not just by his ex-wife, but by a 24-year-old waitress, by Arthur's daughter. "What do you want?" Julian finally whispered, a broken man. "I don't want to destroy this company," Helen said, her voice echoing her father's notes. "My father loved this company. It was his dream, too. I'm here to restore it." Helen stood at the head of the obsidian table. The full power of the room, once centered on Julian, was now focused entirely on her. She had the one thing they all feared, the truth, memorialized in paper and ink. When Helen spoke, her voice was not the shaky murmur of a waitress taking a dinner order. It was clear, cold, and absolute. It was the voice of a founder. "Here is what is going to happen," she stated, her eyes locking on Julian. "First, Julian Vance will tender his resignation as CEO and chairman of the board. Mr. Thorne will do the same, effective immediately." Julian's head, which had been in his hands, snapped up. "You can't—" "I can!" Helen cut him off, her voice like ice. "And you will. Your separation will be to pursue other opportunities. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement regarding my family, my father, and the circumstances of your retirement. You will leave this building today, and you will not return. Second," she continued, "in lieu of a catastrophic, multi-billion-dollar lawsuit for 2 decades of copyright infringement, a suit that will not just bankrupt this company, but will personally ruin every single one of you for breach of fiduciary duty. The Harrison estate will sell the copyright for the Ethelred knot to the company." The room held its breath. This was the negotiation. "In exchange," Helen said, "for the 20% stake my father, Arthur Harrison, was originally promised in his partnership agreement." A banker at the end of the table scoffed. 20%? That's preposterous. That's billions of dollars in stock." Isabella Vance, who had been watching with a quiet, triumphant smile, silenced him with a look. "It's billions in stock, Mr. Davis, or it's zero. It's her terms, or it's Chapter 11. She has the gun, the bullet, and the moral high ground. I suggest you stop talking." Helen didn't even acknowledge the interruption. "Third, I will be given a permanent seat on this board. From that seat, I will oversee the establishment of the Arthur Harrison Foundation for the Arts. It will be funded by 5% of Ethelred's net profits annually. Its mission will be to provide grants to struggling and underrepresented artists, so they never have to choose between their art and their life, the way my father did. Fourth, and finally," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, "tomorrow morning, Ethelred Holdings will issue a global press release. It will publicly and officially acknowledge Arthur Harrison as the co-founder of this company and the sole designer of its original logo. It will correct the historical record. The sole founder myth, Julian, dies today." The silence was total. Julian Vance looked around the table, his face a mask of grey defeat. He was looking for an ally, a lifeline. He found only the cold, assessing eyes of people calculating their own survival. He was a king in a room that had unanimously and silently decided to dethrone him. Isabella Vance finally spoke. "The board finds these terms acceptable. Do we have an agreement?" One by one, the board members nodded. The company had been saved from Armageddon. Isabella pressed a button on her console. Security. We need an escort for Mr. Vance and Mr. Thorne. They are leaving the building. Julian stood, his $5,000 suit hanging on him like a shroud. He didn't look at Helen as he passed. He was a ghost, already haunting a building that was no longer his. Marcus Thorne, the hyena, just looked sick, scurrying out behind him. The next few months were a seismic shift. The Wall Street Journal headline read, "Ethelred's lost founder, Arthur Harrison's legacy restored." The stock, as predicted, was a roller coaster. It plunged, then stabilized, then, as Isabella, as interim CEO, and Helen, as the new public face of the brand's integrity, steered the ship, it began to climb. The narrative shifted from fraud to one of redemption, of a long-lost legacy finally honored. Helen moved her mother from the cramped walk-up in Queens, with its rattling train and peeling paint. Their new home was a beautiful, light-filled apartment overlooking Central Park, with a full-time nursing staff and a small attached studio for Helen. "He would be so proud, Helen," Sarah said one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky over the reservoir. Her voice was stronger than it had been in years. The end of the crushing debt and decades of stress had been a better medicine than any prescription. Helen's office was on the 79th floor, just below the main boardroom. But it wasn't an office. It was a studio. Where Julian's room had been dark obsidian and steel, hers was white walls, natural light, drafting tables and canvases. On the main wall, perfectly framed, were her father's original sketches from the journal. One afternoon, Isabella walked in. "It's time," she said. Helen nodded, nervous. They walked into a packed auditorium. It was the 20th anniversary brand presentation, the one Julian had wanted to use to fire his marketing team. The company's employees were anxious. They had survived a coup and were waiting to see what the future held. Isabella introduced Helen, not as a board member, but as the heart and the future of this company. Helen stepped up to the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces. "For 20 years," she said, her voice projecting to the back row, "Ethelred Holdings has been defined by one symbol, a symbol of unbreakable partnership. It was a design created by my father, Arthur Harrison. It was his promise." She clicked a remote. The old, familiar logo appeared on the giant screen behind her. "It's a beautiful design," she said softly. "It's stable. It's strong. It represents the foundation we were built on. But it was only ever half of the story. It was the promise of a partnership that was broken." She paused, taking a breath. "My father believed that a company, like a person, must evolve. That a legacy isn't just about what you were, but what you choose to become. He dreamed of a future for this company that was bolder, more complex and more honest. He held one design in reserve, his legacy knot." She clicked the remote again. On the screen, the old, familiar Ethelred knot dissolved. In its place, new lines, in the company's silver and blue, animated, weaving themselves into existence. It was the other drawing, the more beautiful, more intricate, more dynamic design. The one from her father's journal, the one Julian had called too complex. A collective gasp, then a wave of murmurs went through the audience. It was stunning. It was an evolution, not a rejection. "Today," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at the masterpiece her father had dreamed of, "we honor our entire past, especially the parts that were painful, and we embrace a new future. We are Ethelred Holdings, and this is our new legacy." The room erupted in applause, not just polite, but thunderous. Helen looked to the front row, where her mother sat in her wheelchair, weeping with joy. Helen Hayes, the waitress who had been mocked for her pretzel doodle, now owned 20% of the company that had just adopted her father's true masterpiece as its new face. She hadn't just reclaimed his legacy, she had finally, and fully, brought it home. Helen Harrison proved that a legacy is more powerful than an empire. Julian Vance built his $10 billion company on a lie, but he forgot that the truth, like art, can't be buried forever. It always finds the light. In the end, it wasn't a boardroom, a lawsuit, or a stock price that brought him down. It was a single drawing, held in the hand of the one person he never saw coming, the daughter of the man he betrayed. Helen didn't just get justice. She rewrote the entire company's future, turning her father's stolen art into a new beginning for thousands. What did you think of Helen's story? Do you believe she did the right thing? Or should she have exposed and destroyed the company completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and legacy, please hit that like button, share it with a friend, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.